Welcome to Net Positive, where we help you to transform your eco-anxiety into action through regeneration and resilience. In today's episode, we're joined by Bonita Ford, an author and educator who helps youth and adults navigate eco and climate emotions, such as anxiety, grief, fear, and hopelessness, while taking thoughtful climate action. And how can we accept and face environmental destruction and loss at scale? And possibly one of the outcomes is the end of our species. And how do we embrace our lives and contribute to the world and wake up every day? Bonita is the author of Embers of Hope, Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. She's a facilitator and speaker who supports people in coping with and addressing their eco and climate breakdowns. Bonita is currently Climate Mental Health Network's Gen Z program lead, and she has mentored facilitators at Youth Climate Lab. In today's episode, we'll hear more from Bonita about learning how to make fire and that the tiniest embers can be enough. Self-care and grieving and connecting with the essence of life, and what we can do to build up our communities, the places we love, and the people we love. This conversation is for anyone who's experiencing eco-anxiety, grief, loss, fear, or hopelessness, but also inspiration, hope, and looking forward to the future. And speaking of that, I'm excited to bring on Bonita Ford as Pathfinder here on Net Positive. Bonita, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in today's conversation. This will be really poignant and personal to me too. And growing up in the outdoors as a young man, but also being drawn to the flame and fires, I'm really curious to learn more about this key takeaway that you've got here. What's your experience with making fire?
Oh my gosh, it was such a humbling experience. I came to it several years ago for a very practical reason. I was thinking about power outages. I was thinking about survival skills and thinking about how in the part of the world where I live, how intense the winter is and important fire is to our everyday lives and our very basic survival. And I took a weekend workshop with somebody in our community about wilderness skills and fire making without matches. And it was such an interesting process because so from that workshop, I learned to, we made a bow drill, which basically looks like a bow from a bow and arrow. That has
a branch, like a curved
like a
branch,
kind of
right?
Exactly. And it has a piece of cord on it, and then a couple smaller pieces that actually fit in your hand. And so we learned to make that. And basically by the end of the weekend, I could have that thing make a lot of squeaky noises and a lot of smoke and a little bit of dust. So in a way, it was extremely disheartening because I realized, oh my gosh, wow, this is going to be a long journey. Like, think of something so basic as fire for cooking, for staying warm, for boiling water, purifying water. And to think that this skill was something that I did not grow up with and that it would take me days and weeks and months to learn, and I still have not mastered it. And I think part of what it taught me, so it was just, I'm the kind of person that I tend to want to give up very easily. And I think that translates also very directly into just being present with the state of the world. And so there's always this part of me that is self-critical or just wants to kind of just walk away from it and say, oh, this is not worth it. And I think that part of me is
the inner voice. You can know that voice.
Yeah. And I think it's around fear of failure. So in learning to make fire, it was having part of what was just so enlightening about that learning process was listening to this inner self-talk that directly, again, translates into my work in the world, my work in the community. And I think actually a lot of people have this belief that we can't do it, this belief that we can't make a difference, this belief that just the ways that we can stop ourselves even before we get started. So what I learned from practicing making fire with the bow drill, and really, I'm not good at it. It was learning to be with the possibility of failure at every moment. That is I think in our mainstream society, the way that the way that I was brought up, the way that like the mainstream school system, it's so much about performance and competition, and we get graded and so like you either pass or you fail. And learning fire and learning to show up as an engaged citizen at this time in the world, there are no guarantees, and there isn't an easy finish line, and there actually is no great mastery in this process. It's just about, and I think that's part of what I learned from the process, was that it really asked me to keep showing up and be okay with not knowing, be okay with failing, be okay with tiny incremental improvements. And it also taught me that the learning and the growth and the change doesn't necessarily happen in a linear way. So it's not like step 1, step 2, step 3, and you obviously progress in that way. And we're seeing that in our society. We look on the news now, and if we think back to the way social change has unfolded in the last decade or 5 decades, it's 1 step forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so I think just having this very practical skill that I was trying to learn and practicing it on a regular basis and seeing how the learning and the progress that it was kind of unexpected, that it wasn't this easy linear forward progression, and that at a moment when I least expected it, I made an ember for the first time, and I didn't even know what to do with it at that point. I think I was so much on this track of, okay, be okay with failure, be okay with failure. And I kept expecting failure all the time because I'd only seen months and weeks of failure. And then when I actually had made my first ember, I wasn't even prepared for it. And
almost by surprise. What do I do with
it
this?
it was hugely by surprise. I was literally on my, I was on my front porch doing it at the time. It's an enclosed front porch. I was only making squeaky noises. It was an unsafe place to be practicing, but I had only had weeks of making smoke. So it was absolutely, in my mind, safe to do this on the front porch. And then all of a sudden I had this thing that was smoking in front of me without doing anything. And I thought, oh my gosh, where's the water? I shouldn't have been doing this on the porch. And so again, it was humbling, that just this reminder that not all of it is in our control, that sometimes what sparks the change comes at a moment when we least expect it. And can we harness that energy in that moment? Can we be ready to really move forward with that? Because it doesn't actually take it to start a fire. The ember can be like just the size of a sesame, or maybe like a sunflower seed. It can be tiny, tiny, tiny. And so I think part of this work is about showing up, trying, being okay with uncertainty. And part of it is also being ready to harness that energy and move forward when we do have a spark of change, when that momentum kind of does, or when we kind of hit a pivot point where, okay, something actually is moving forward in the direction that we're wanting to. and really channel that in intentional ways. So yeah, fire has been such a powerful teacher for me.
I wrote in my notes friction plus frustration plus fire, or
Yes.
friction plus frustration plus failure
Mm,
equals fire. Like,
yes.
so my
Oh, I
takeaways
love that.
from this is that I've been there. Two, it's kind of a great equalizer because you can't outthink it
Oh
in
my
a lot
gosh.
of ways. Here you are,
Yes.
you've completed compulsory education, you're out there living as a thriving human being in the world, and I can't make fire without matches.
Right?
Like, I don't understand why this is possible. And it's wet outside, and all of my materials are soaked. How am I going to
Mm-hmm.
survive with my canapini weenies or whatever? So
Mm-hmm.
I can see how that there's a lot of frustration there. And then you having to persevere, even almost, I can even see you kind of like mindlessly bowing out on the front porch and then getting accidental ember there. So that story is very visual. But how's that skill glowing for you now? Are you pretty good at your bow skills?
I am not. I am not. I am absolutely not. And
Absolutely
I
not.
think part of what it also taught me. So, apart from the idea that I think we should be teaching this to children, like if I had started this at age 5 or 6, I probably would be a lot more comfortable with it by now. And at the same time, I think part of what I realized in this process was that, yes, I do think it's important for us to, like, as people living in industrial societies, for us to go back to basic practical skills, right? Like learning to grow our own food, learning to build things. I think all of that is helpful and necessary. And at the same time, I think part of the lesson was about community, that
Mm.
it's that we're we're not the human beings through evolution did not typically exist as individuals.
Mhm.
So I think, and I think we also learned that in this mainstream dominant Western paradigm, we have a very individualistic mindset. And yes, I do think that reskilling ourselves is an important part of this transition, this large scale transition that we are having to go through. And at the same time, and I think we're really seeing that now, especially just with the political climate, that people are leaning into one another, that really, I think ultimately our safety net is community. And so even though ideally, and I think in a society where everyone was taught from a young age how to meet their basic needs in a way that was in harmony with the ecosystem that they were a part of, I think at the same time, given that lack of skill, which includes me, if one person in a family unit, if 2 people in a neighborhood or 5 people in a neighborhood knew how to make fire, that would be enough.
Mhm.
And so it's a little bit of a both and that I do think it's important for us to continue learning. And at the same time, we don't have to know all the things.
Mhm.
I think that's part of our response to the crises of our time, is learning to lean into the relationships and the communities that we have already built or are continuing to build and
Mhm.
strengthen and fortify. And also so these are our response networks, and these are our safety nets, and these are our support systems as well
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit of all of that. So yeah, back to your question. I'm still kind of crappy starting fire with a bow drill. I can start fire with an ember. If you give me an ember, I can start fire. But making an ember from a bow drill, that's still pretty sketchy.
So you've taken my mind on a journey here, and I just want to leave some breadcrumbs for our future selves to come back for another episode. That future episode's name is Dangerous Tools, I think, because I do think that, pardon me, fire and sharp objects, knives, axes, these kinds of dangerous tools, needles, are important to be able to know how to use just for resilience and survivability. There's a really great tour, a building tour that I got to go on in Atlanta at the Candida building at Georgia Tech's campus. And the team there had a station set up for button sewing, which was always kind of like a little, like, what do buttons have to do with buildings? And really the story was around resiliency and repair. And knowing how to use some of these simple tools, like you knowing what to do with a glowing ember, you knowing what to do with a broken button to be mended, both take some skill sets that you may not innately have. You could probably figure it out eventually, but it's going to take some trial and error to get there. And that resilience, I mean, that's kind of where you started your story, was how do we be more resilient in our community? Okay, so that's where I don't want to get too far off of track, is talk a little more about that community that you've been surrounded with and how you're supporting them through both care and, I mean, you're dealing with big emotions in the conversations that you're having, and even within yourself. Tell me, if you would, a little more about the communities that you are part of.
I like that you said communities in plural, because I think that is
kind of Venn diagram, right? If you're part of, there's a lot of overlap, like petals.
Absolutely. Exactly. So I think in the last, let's say 2 to 3 years, I've been thinking more about, at least in my volunteer work, I've been thinking more about what I need. I think in the past, my younger self, who had tons of energy and thought that she had as much time in the world as she could imagine, I kind of led with what is needed in my community. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years, just because I've had moments of kind of hitting the wall internally, just really reaching the end of my own stores of energy, I've been leading more with this question of, what do I need? What do I want? What would be nourishing for me? What would be supportive for me? And then I've created those things if they didn't exist already. And so I started a local support group, just a really small group of other friends who were activists. I started another group with folks who are, well, actually a number of groups, but it's again, it's been looking for, exactly like you said, this Venn diagram, for me, looking for these overlaps and really not discounting what do I need, like what would really be nourishing for me, and having that be a part of what I bring into the world. Not putting myself last, really looking. And I think this is also part of what I've learned in this last year, is I was reminded by someone in a support group that I attended that social change it's not a short-term endeavor. It can take years, it can take decades. And so learning to take care of myself, learning to sustain my energy, it's not a sprint. It's really a marathon. And that's been an important lesson for me. And also learning that, like, really learning to reframe it in my mind, that if this is, and I do think that this is, that engaging in social change, trying to be a change maker, that this is a life choice. This isn't something that I'm doing for a few weeks or a few months. This is the path that I'm on for the rest of my life. And I choose this because this is the kind of world that I want to live in. And this is the kind of community that I'm co-creating now. And that is it's not something that I can do as an individual, hold away without relying on or collaborating with other people.
Mm.
So even, whether it's the care aspect, whether it's joining support groups, creating small conversation groups, or whether it is responding to something specific so I'm thinking of an example here in our own local community where there's a proposed development that I am very concerned about, that hundreds of people are very concerned about. So building community is also about having or being able to create an organized response to the things that are being threatened in our world, the things that have been broken, that are needing repair, that are needing attention, and that are needing our protection. And I'm really seeing that in this last year, that so much of my activism in response to an issue that's happening in my community, so much of that rests on a foundation of past relationships and past goodwill. So what I mean by that is that if I just came into this place as a new person who knew no one, I would be in a very different position than where I am now, having lived here since 2008 and having built friendships and having connected with neighbors and having volunteered a lot and having hosted a lot of potlucks and discussion groups. And so it's different actually when there's mutual trust. It's different when there's mutual goodwill. It's different when there's a sense of, I feel comfortable with you. I want to support you. How can I help? And so for me, community is all of those things. Community is about response. And it is also about it's also first responders together.
Mm-hmm.
So, when disaster hits, when I'm just thinking about a couple of years ago when we had and it was around this time of year, this happened. The ground was frozen. There were heavy rains. It was around freezing. So we got a lot of freezing rain, ice on the trees, lots of branches came down throughout the whole region, power outages, but there was heavy rain. So there was a lot of flooding. And when there's something like that happens, and like in many natural disasters, it happens across a large area. So it can take a long time for paramedics, for
First responders
but I guess I'm thinking of like professional first responders or organized first responders to actually show up. And so I think our almost like pre-first responders are the people who we can walk to at that point, because it actually is the first response. It's just making sure, are our neighbors okay? Can we help each other? Can we lend each other a generator to pump the water out? Is everyone safe? And so there's that aspect of community. And then there's also just the aspect of being able to lean on one another and lean into one another when we are struggling with just a sense of despair, just a sense of loss, a sense of overwhelm or hopelessness or grief. That to do that alone can be so, well, I mean, not that it's easy holding big feelings with other people. And at the same time, also, it reminds us that we're not alone. And I think isolation can really amplify the impact of our emotions. And just to have a sense of being understood by other people, and to receive compassion from one another, all of that, and have a sense of belonging, all of that can really support us in those critical moments around our mental health, and also support us in the long term around responding to our own emotional and mental health challenges around, wow, this is a scary world that we're living in. Wow, this is okay, it's not as, we don't live in a utopia, and being, we're seeing a lot of change. We're being faced with a lot of loss. And how do I be real with that? How can I make peace with that and also respond to that in a good way? And it can be so easy to isolate ourselves in that process. And I think it also doesn't serve us well to isolate ourselves in that process, because we do need one another. That community is a part of our social support. It is part of our mental health and part of our well-being.
You've taken me on a mental journey here. I think I mentioned that, but the picture has continued because it went from friction and frustration, failure to fire, fire to flame, then council around the campfire, having community and conversations around that campfire, resilience, disaster happens in community, and then that evening, there's a campfire when all the winds have died down and you're pulling back together and taking stock and grieving. There's a lot of grief there, shared stress, trauma that gets processed out, hopefully in those communities and support networks, but happens staring into a fire and building those communications and tight-knit communities there. Well, and then Flamekeeper, that was the last one. If you ever are searching for your next tattoo, maybe a Flamekeeper, something related to fire, I think that you're a keeper of the flame. Well, Bonita, you've taken us on a journey here. And so I want to step into our next segment and talk about your personal journey. Is this a calling that you had to support people in this way? Is this something that you felt early on in your career or your life path? Was there some sort of pivotal moment that really awoke it, that made you awake to your superpowers of empathy and community building?
I think it's always been with me. My mother said to me recently that even she thought that even when I was really little, I was worrying about things that she didn't think a small child should be worrying about.
Okay. This is none of your concern.
Around, no, day-to-day business. But
for sure. But
it was like I was already asking big existential questions and wondering why poverty existed and why was that allowed? And if there was a God or a creator, why would they allow that? And why would they allow violence and injustice? And so I think it's always been a part of who I am. And one pivotal moment that comes to mind was, believe it or not, when I learned around age 10 that there wasn't a Santa Claus.
Well, that's shocking to someone's worldview.
Well, yeah. And I think, so before I learned, so I'm sorry if there are any young listeners learning from me.
I know, we should have done a plug your ears for our young listeners.
We should have had like a warning at the beginning of this. Yeah, kind of so I hope this does not rock anyone's world today. And so before I learned that Santa did not exist in the way that I understood.
There you go. Okay.
As a jolly dude in red who could appear to every household in one night. Before I understood that, I really grappled with this idea that some people didn't have enough, that other children like myself didn't have enough food, that they didn't have toys, that they couldn't afford to go to school. And the way my little self made peace with that was I had this belief that at least there is this one day of the year this benevolent being would at least shower all of the children in the world with toys. So it was heartbreaking. It was devastating. I still have not worked through it entirely. I'm still talking with my therapist about it every so often. And I mean, in reality, I'm laughing about it, and I can also feel the tenderness of it in my heart. And I guess that is the way that I do hold so much in the world, is just with tenderness and also with love at the same
Mm,
time. I think that also translates into my work around the climate crisis. I never want to give in to despair. That's what I mentioned earlier, that there is this part of me that always says, I can just give up. Like, this is too big. There's no point, right? I can't. I just can't. This is bigger than me. And I think I think part of what supports me in this, and that balances that voice in me, is that there's also always a part of me that says, yes, I hear you. Like, yes, I feel that frustration,
mm,
that discouragement, and always, just looking for this and, and so that pivotal moment of discovering that there was no Santa, those were really big shoes to fill.
mm, mhm,
And I think I think that's really at the root of what drives me, is I know that I'll never be able to fill those shoes and take care of every single child and every single person on the planet and every single, wild and precious place. And I have definitely learned over the years that it is in my power, and it is actually in all of our power, that we do have something magical, or at least
mm,
semi-magical, within us to make a difference to someone else. And whether, it could be a big thing like mentoring a young person who is struggling in a period of their life, or if it's as simple as talking to someone at the coffee shop who is having a hard day. Like, we never ever know what difference we can make for other people. And so that is part of what keeps me going, is, yes, I know I do hear this little voice in me that says, this is too big, I can't make a difference. And I can keep trying, and all of those little and big ways that I show up for the people around me, and that extends beyond. And I think I didn't say that earlier. When I think about community, I'm thinking about more than just my family, my friends, my coworkers, my neighbors that I know by name. I'm also thinking about strangers that I encounter on the street. I'm thinking about the people that the cashiers at the grocery store, the people who pick up the recycling and the garbage, when we put it out on the curb. Like, it's all of these people who are known and unknown to me, seen and unseen, that I think all of these people and all of these places make up, it all support me in some way. And so in big and in small ways, I really try and show up for all of them as much as I can. So so Santa Claus, totally trying to make peace with not being able to fill those shoes, but damn, I'm gonna give it a good shot. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to transition us to the next segment. I'm going to take red and turn it into rose. So this is our
Mhm.
community garden. And have you ever done the rose, thorn, bud
Mhm.
conversation framework? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, just a quick reminder for those listening at home that a rose is something positive that's happening in Bonita's world, something that's blossoming these days. A thorn is a prickly problem that she may be having that may be drawing blood to the fingertips. And then a bud is something that gives you hope for the future. Given enough sunlight and warmth, will turn into something amazing. So, Bonita, tell me what's really fragrant in your world these days? What's your rose?
Well, one of my roses is some of the work that I have been, it was what the fruit that came at the end of a year's worth of work through Climate Mental Health Network. And so, as I mentioned in my intro, I'm the Gen Z lead. So I oversee the Gen Z programming for CMHN, and we just launched a zine, so it was our cohort, our Gen Z cohort. So this was at the end, we had a group of 9 young women, climate leaders who were from across the US, engaged in very, very different areas. Some of them have been involved in policy writing. One was involved in a legal case that was taken to the state of Montana. They're an amazing, amazing group of young women. One of them started facilitating and hosts climate cafes in New York City. They're such an engaging, inspiring, heartfelt group of young women. And so they created a zine that shares their stories, their experiences, some of their struggles, and there are also a lot of tools in the zine. And so I really want to, encourage listeners to check it out as well. It's on the Climate Mental Health Network website, and I can give Richard the link so you can check it out.
Perfect. Well, I'll drop
in the notes. And so, that has been such a rose to have this zine, which was this collaboration between all of these cohort members, this group of 9 women and myself, and bringing their stories, their perspectives, their struggles to the world, and also offering tools to support people as they are going through their own journeys, whether they are just starting off on their journey as a young climate activist or are already really engaged in the climate space and trying to just manage or just to hold their own emotions, address their own emotions and their own mental health in a more balanced and healthier way. There are amazing stories. There's beautiful art, there's music, there's poetry, and lots of practical tools. So please check out our Gen Z zine. That has been such a beautiful rose. Yeah, please check it out. You can
that sounds amazing.
Download it and share it and you don't have to be Gen Z to read it and enjoy it, though it would also be, I think, also something great to share with the young people in your life, a great conversation opener. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So the other side of this, Riz, tell me about a thorn. Do you have any prickly problems that you've been faced or challenges recently?
I'm mindful that this is a podcast.
Yeah, we don't have enough time to unpack. Well, how about this? Oh, go ahead. Unless you have an answer.
Well, I think what I was just going to say was that I think the thorn, and I think I've spoken to it already, and at different points in this conversation, I think it's just about, it's not a specific thorn specific to a moment. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an ongoing thorn of, there's a part of my heart that kind of just bleeds for what is broken, what is breaking, what we're losing in the world. And that hurts. That is so hard. And I think that's a hard thing to live with, whether we are adults or kids, just to really acknowledge how the mainstream society that capitalism, colonialism, just the structures the systems that we're embedded within, that these were not designed to serve life. These were not designed to support and nourish our communities. These systems uphold and funnel power and wealth into the hands of a small minority. And when we know that, it's really hard to make peace with that. And so I think for me, it's an ongoing thorn to see in the news, whether it's in federal politics in the States or whether it's provincial or federal politics here in Canada or in what we call Canada. It does keep making my heart break to see what we are losing and how some people in power willingly make decisions or put policies in place that are clearly not for the good or the well-being of the majority of people.
Wow, that's a big thorn.
It is a big thorn. Yeah.
Well, give that a moment to have space. And then a bud for the future, something that you're hopeful for as you look through your lens.
Well, and I think that's why the thorn is so important to me, is that part of the hope is in response that I see in people, in communities, when faced with so many threats, with so much loss, that most of the time and most of us are not giving up. And that, especially with the current political climate, I'm actually seeing and hearing more people coming together, more people rallying around one another, to at least, having grown up in Canada, having lived in the US, and to, to some of the elders in my life, this is Turtle Island. This is not these names, Canada and United States. These were names that were given by other people. But having grown with kind of in a school system that was created by a colonial government, I guess I was privileged to have grown up with this assumption that democracy was a given, that my freedom was a right and it was given, that my safety, that my ability to vote as a person of color, as a woman, that my safety walking out into the street, that all of these things were a given. And they're not a given for a lot of people in the world, or even having water from my tap that I can drink. I believed all of these things were a given, and they're not for a lot of people. And so again, this is part of the thorn, and part of what the bud is and has been, or it's such a central part of my work, is continuing to find ways to turn those thorns, because they're real thorns, right? I don't, like, my life calling, my work has never been about ignoring those thorns. It's about, okay, given the realities of our world, where are the buds? What can we nurture? How can we turn this into something better? And so that is the bud for me, is especially in this last month with the inauguration in the US, with our recent provincial election here in Ontario. The bud is people on the ground in community who are not paid to do this work, but who are actually coming together to say, okay, these things that we thought were a given, apparently they're not a given anymore. And so how do we try and protect them? And how do we try and protect people who are the most vulnerable? And that is the bud for me.
Wow. It's a big bud.
Mm-hmm.
I want to continue down this gardening theme here with a little twist of what tips or tricks, techniques do you have for our audience that you could give away, like packets of wildflower seeds?
Mm.
What can we plant and sow for the future?
So when I think of seeds, I think of starting small and having things be simple and doable. I'm thinking of people who are already doing this work in climate spaces, doing environmental work, whether it's professionally or whether it's a central part of their volunteer lives. And so to those people who are already pouring so much of their energy, their hearts, their minds into this area, I think the seeds that I would give them would be around taking a break, taking care of ourselves, getting out for a walk, and especially doing that with other people. It doesn't have to be a big group. I'm pretty introverted, actually. So doing that with one other person, just having, and so really, because I think, again, like even like the technology that so many of us, I think probably everyone that will listen to this podcast will have this experience of having that. It's easier, or it can be so tempting to have relationships through social media and putting more energy into those relationships rather than the real relationships with real people who are physically around us. So that seed, I would encourage people to focus on self-care and to also grow, or like to remember to invest energy, to reinvest energy into our relationships, into social support network, into having community care. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Especially I think if people are really, really engaged in this already, then it might be too daunting or take too much energy to imagine that community care has to be a big thing if this is already our life's work. That's another thing that I didn't mention earlier. We were talking about, things that I have been creating that I also love, that are really nurturing for me too, is I've been having kind of like self-care afternoons with some of my friends, and people will bring basins, and we'll just soak our feet in hot water and put in, herbs from the garden and drink tea and just chat by the fire. And it's simple, and we laugh, and it's just time away from screens and responsibilities. And it's so nourishing. And then the other seed that I think I would offer, so to people who really care, and maybe this is not a central part of their lives yet, so maybe this is not a part of their life professionally or part of their volunteer work, would be to look around, research, find a local project, find a local group to join, to engage in, to support a local effort. This isn't necessarily about just personal individual choices. This is about amplifying our efforts, supporting the good work that already exists. And so that would be my seed for people who are wanting to engage, is look for others who are, maybe a step or a few steps ahead of you on this journey already, and join them and support them and lend a hand and ask how you can be of service, and listen.
That's a good one. Okay, last question as we plant these seeds of hope. I'd love to know about your gardeners, folks that have been your mentors and helped light your path. And the other side of that conversation, who are you tending to grow? Who are you helping out as mentees? So tell me about your mentors and your mentees, Bonita.
Oh, those are big questions. I'm going to try and make this seed size, because it could be a whole other conversation. I have been really blessed with a lot of really amazing, wise people. And I'm actually not going to name them right now, because
that's fair.
We forget one or two, and then I'm going to feel guilty afterwards. Like, why didn't you mention that person? I just want to, I guess, just in a broad sense, the mentors in my life have been a combination of people who have supported me in my spiritual journey, in my personal healing journey. Ones who have, it's actually interesting. It's, when I think of mentors, very few of them have been professional mentors to me first. It's really been more on a personal level. And I think those are the places in my life that it's been more on the personal side and less on the professional side that I've needed the encouragement. And it's been, so I think the gifts from those mentors has been just being seen and being seen, and having people that could see and appreciate my potential, what was it felt deeply buried for me, but they saw it, they could sense it. People that could help me remember that I'm on the right track, like that I really on the right path for me. I am following my heart's calling, and that I am. Yeah, it's just, so in a way they've been cheerleaders, in a way they've been sounding boards, in a way they've been role models, in a way they've been shoulders for me to cry on at my worst moments. And in other ways they've taught me, and this kind of goes back to the piece around fire, and specifically around all of the skills, like around kind of the lack in the mainstream dominant worldview that I grew up with, all that lacked, just the ways that I was disconnected with community, the ways that I was disconnected with physical place, how these teachers in my life have also given me kind of breadcrumbs to find my way back to these things, to actually learn how to be in relationship with the land that I live on, with the plants that I tend here, the trees that give shade to our garden. And so they've just, in such a gentle and long-term way, have just slowly dropped little seeds, little offerings, little breadcrumbs on the path to remind me of how to get back to who I am, essentially. And I think who we all are, essentially. I think, just coming back to who we are as human beings, our humanity, and also in relationship with the natural world. And then to your question about who I am supporting in this last 2 to 3 years, I've really had the privilege and the pleasure of supporting a number of youth, whether it's been through this Gen Z cohort with Climate Mental Health Networks, with this small group, or whether it's been through online or in-person workshops with young people that I might meet once and might never meet again. And I think what stands out to me in those relationships is, and again, it goes back to this piece around community that I have heard again and again from young people how important it has been to them to be reminded to know that they are not alone. And also to clarify, the youth that I connect with, so these are like in climate and environmental spaces. So these are young people who are concerned about the planet, the climate, the state of the world. So for them, it seems, I've heard from them that it's so important for them to know that they are not the only one who is worrying about this. They are not carrying this burden on their own. There are other people who are struggling emotionally. There are other people who are trying to to catalyze systemic changes, that there are a lot of people in this movement. And I think that's important. Again, just back to technology. I think the technology that we have at our fingertips, these smartphones that probably most, if not all listeners to this on this podcast that you have in your pocket, this can be such an isolating tool. It's, in a way, it connects us to the world. And in a way, we're just in a room on our own with the screen. And that can be so isolating and so lonely for adults, and especially for young people, especially for youth. And so for me, it's been about just being a safe, supportive, compassionate presence and saying, reminding people that what you're feeling, what you're struggling with is natural. It's totally natural. There is nothing wrong with you. I can relate. And would you like to share more? What would you, what is your experience and how can I support you? And that has definitely been it's been a very humbling process. Yes.
Bonita, for our last segment, it's inspired by you. Thank you for your recommendation as a great way to ground our episodes. And I'd love to know, what's one of your favorite places in nature?
There's two. There's three, but I'll just say two. We'll leave the third one for another conversation, like in a year's time or something, right? I think the first most important piece to me in nature is our garden. It's been such a teacher for me. It's been such a haven. It's been just on so many levels, just in terms of around self-care and also around just the idea of kind of mutual responsibility and relationships that I didn't learn that growing up, that actually I have a responsibility to this place, and that my actions and that my choices affect the life around me. And that comes back to me. And, oh, okay, so that reciprocity, that informs my choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that the seeds that I sow now are part of what I may be harvesting in the future. So just so many practical lessons around food, around ecology, and also so many kind of life lessons and spiritual lessons. So that's one place. And then the other place is a wetland that is about a 10-minute walk from where I live. And that place has also been it's also a haven for me last year. So I tend to visit there more in the winter because of ticks and because the trails can get more overgrown in the summer. And last year around, end of the year, I was going out there almost once a day. And there was on one day in particular, I saw 8 beavers. And that was just amazing. And again, so part of what I love doing is walking out there, kind of like a walking meditation, but I also sing. So I got into this thing where I started singing to the beavers.
The beaver song.
And it was really, really incredible because one of the beavers in particular, I think most of them recognized me as that 2-legged who would sing to them. And they just kept doing their thing. I was kind of like the radio in them. And one of them in particular really loved it. And so when she heard me, she would drop what she was doing. And this happened on a few occasions where she would just start swimming in front of me and just circle in front of me and listen. And so she was like, oh, screw the radio. Like, I'm actually going to go and hang out and like watch this concert. And so it's just been this only happened like, a handful of times. It's not like every single time I go to the wetland, I get to sing to beavers. It is magical, but it's also, it's not a given. It's not a given, which is part of the magic. And that has also taught me, it's given me such a sense of humility. Again, that, not only am I in relationship with the plants that I'm tending, that these wild animals, not only do they have lives of their own, that they're sentient. For those of us that have pets, we treat our dogs and cats like they understand. And I think they understand. That's a whole other conversation. We'll have another conversation on animals. No, why would you? But we can, we can treat our pets like they understand. And we do see that they respond to us and that they know us and that they have bonds with us and they treat us like family. And that wild animals have that intelligence and that capacity and that understanding as well too. And my God, like that is just, again, such a reminder of how much I want to protect in this world beyond just my family and beyond just my friends, like all of these beings that I've never met who are also impacted by this civilization that is going off the rails. So this wetland has been just such a beautiful place for me to get quiet and sing to beavers. And it's also taught me about what I'm trying to protect, because there is a development that is being proposed right there. And it's really a time in the world where I think we're being called to action. And for those of us who are already engaged in this work, then I think we're being called to be even more mindful and more intentional about how we spend our energy, because we can't burn out from doing this. It's not, and that's part of what I'm learning. And maybe that can be a big parting seed, or the last, like the acorn that I leave for people at the end of this conversation, is that I do think that if you're concerned about the state of the world, if you're concerned about what the present and what the future could look like, then I would invite you to find ways of taking action, and in ways that speak to your heart in ways that can connect with, that can strengthen your community, that can strengthen your safety net, and also while being really thoughtful, really intentional about what is the best use of your talents, your passion, and your precious life energy. Like if you're feeling called towards this, this is a life calling. This is not a one season project. So how can we treat this life like a life calling? How can we really support ourselves in doing this work in community for the long run?
Well, that's like the perfect summary of today's episode as well. Bonita, thank you so much for joining me here in the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. You've taught us how about your experience learning to make fire, and that's such a great story to pull through this conversation. You've given us really practical applications and tips and tricks, if you will, for self-care and dealing with anxiety and grieving. I love the idea of the acorn there at the end to really sprout into something amazing. And that grove, that forest, that stand of trees that act as community together and kind of shelter around that campfire council conversation. So thank you so much for sharing with me today and sharing with our audience. I hope that you'll come back again. We can do our dangerous tools episode, or
that would be fun.
maybe some of your feature some of the members of your zine. That sounds amazing too. So thank you so much for sharing such great resources and all that you bring to our conversation today. I really appreciate you joining us here.
Thank you so much, Richard. This has been a pleasure.
And remember, everyone at home, big changes start small. We'll see you in the next episode.